Alright, so what's the theme of Fire Emblem Thracia 776? Well, fortunately it still goes back to the idea of, Leaf versus Seliph, right? Leaf in Thracia 776, it clearly grew more than Seliph did. Of course, Leaf obviously having to, figure out, the whole Thracian Peninsula conflict, of course going to prison at first in regards to figuring out the child hunts and stuff, and of course Leaf, losing a very, close friend like that in Dryas. Yeah, it took a bit more of a toll, and it took a bit more roughing out to get Leaf to where he was, but ultimately, yeah, he did, I guess, grow, in a better way. Of course, Seliph, he did have his moments, but ultimately, the relative course of his character stayed, mostly the same. Of course, Lewin fed him a bunch of information regarding the history of the continent, and of course that is important as well, that Seliph knows, where all this, most of the suffering and pain in Jugdal comes from, but still. Of course, Leaf, without pretty much August and, some of the other little events that had to fall into place, Leaf probably wouldn't have gotten very far at all, or, wouldn't have turned out nearly as valiant as he did in Thracia. But ultimately, though, Leaf, he does accomplish what he accomplishes in this game, and yeah, it is I guess a more positive outlook, since the Thracian conflict, it's more of an internal fundamental conflict within Jugdal, rather than the Lopterians, which originated technically from outside of Jugdal. So I think Leaf's journey, I think, is more important, and especially Leaf being in a position, of House Leonster, who obviously was known to have denied, ruled over the peninsula with some very bad policies, I guess you could say, and some very bad habits, and ultimately, Leaf is able to correct that, and I think that's what makes his overall story more positive, I guess, than Seliph specifically. But regardless of that, though, both of these guys, they do have their flaws, I guess, notable ones. Well, with Seliph, I think it mainly goes back to, for me at least, his conversation with Patty. He didn't understand, how war worked in regards to, that money and, budget and economy, and it appears that Seliph, well, he does appear to be a pretty hard-on when it comes to, thieving and stuff like that. Obviously, he scorns Patty a fair bit, and he even calls her one of, their ilk, so to speak. So there's a little bit of, questionable things with Seliph in regards to that kind of stuff. But either way, though, Seliph, of course, he's mostly just concerned about getting the Empire out of the continent, and that's a fine enough motivation, of course, for now. But either way, Leaf himself, of course, obviously, he doesn't, understand a lot of stuff about where his food came from, and the whole Thracian conflict, but of course he overcomes all that stuff, and he makes, strong decisions, out of that and whatnot, and, of course, he appears to rectify all of the wrongs in the Thracian continent and all that stuff, though, of course, there is still the looming, idea of what happened with him and Trevant and stuff like that, and, obviously, pain, it doesn't just go away like that, and very clearly there were still some relative tensions. I'm just hoping the pain in regards to that didn't go into a bad place, so to speak. But regardless of what Leaf did in this timeline, fighting a bunch of battles across the continent and stuff, he does, I guess he is a more light in the shining dark, I guess you can say, a more sustainable outlook. But regardless of that, of course, both of these, both Seliph and Leaf, were sort of made, mainly, of course, by their tacticians, being Lewin and August. And of course, August, in that one cutscene, I believe after 14X, chapter 14X, he is in fact working in concert with Lewin as well. So it appears that, of course, Lewin, as you know, he's in this post-time skip, he is possessed by, of course, Forseti and stuff, and yeah, obviously Forseti, a product of, a dragon who created him. Obviously, the dragons are much stronger than the humans, individually, and well, obviously, clearly, dragons, have had quite a big part in Jugdrill's fate, I guess you can say. Of course, with Naga, and the Divine Dragon against, of course, Loptis and the Fell Dragon, so to speak. So it appears, this continent, it's kind of been a plaything for dragons in a particular sense, but either way, I guess why that's important is mainly because, well, even if these guys, Seliph and Leaf, they're fairly positive for the continent, at least in the short term. In the long term, what do they actually contribute to the continent as a whole? Do they actually build, better societies? Do they build infrastructures, technology, stuff like that? Or is it just, more of the same for Jugdrill, as you would say? It's hard to say exactly, but regardless, though, Leaf without August, probably would have turned out, pretty similar to his genealogy incarnation, where, of course, he gets a lot of his troops killed in the raid on Ulster, and, of course, Leaf, in relative, concert with Seliph, he's not quite as strong, and of course, he's just a little bit more, rough around the edges, I guess you can say, a bit more brutish in behavior, but I don't know. But regardless, though, Leaf, luckily, in this timeline, he does find August and does what he does, but either way, though, of course, Seliph, he was, more destined to save the continent. Lewin, had his, claws, dug in very much with Seliph, so he would have set him down the right path regardless, but either way, Leaf is more so just a possibility, I guess you can say, in the grand scheme of things. But either way, I guess the main, theme of this story, I guess, in particular, is the fact that, of course, personal growth, no matter how small it may seem, it's, I guess, better than always riding the high line or the skyline, whatever you want to call it. And you can even see it with characters like Olwen, of course, who obviously had no idea about the child hunt and stuff like that, and until she gets, of course, captured, and the problem was put right in front of her face, being locked up with a bunch of children, about a fourth of her age. She realizes what must be done, and even though the moment seems a little bit pathetic in that particular instance, Olwen does experience a large amount of growth even in that little moment, and she does find quite a bit of resolve to fight strongly for Leaf's army, and I guess that is fairly representative of Thracia and what it is. But same from Rita, who suddenly becomes an Ultra Blade Master, just by trusting a stranger essentially, and that is that's pretty cool. That's pretty suave. But either way, though, of course, not much more to say in regards to the main theme, so let's, I guess we'll talk about the music. Music, I do like it. I mean, it's pretty good music to use, like, in mashups and stuff, like combining Fire Emblem songs together. I do like this music for that thing, but, it did come out, the soundtrack came out, in 1999 on the SNES, and, obviously, this soundtrack is a fair bit, less beefy than, of course, Genealogy. So I guess it wasn't really, pushing the envelope, so to speak. But either way, though, it's the soundtrack does what it does, and it does it fine enough, of course. I still, it's still very, high quality. There's a lot more boom, boom, ba-da-down. Yeah, it's more, I guess, drawn out, more flat, but it's overall the soundtrack is very nice still. Of course, there's Leaf's theme, pretty good. Both the map theme and that after battle theme as well, of course. But of course, there's the famous near defeat music of this game, which is very unique, I guess. The dreary edge and the boom, boom, or whatever you want to call it. I quite like that quite a bit, but I guess on a more serious topic, of course, it does, take a lot of cues from Mystery of the Emblem. It is a little bit more rhythmic rather than, I guess, purely atmospheric. But regardless, though, it does feel slightly irrelevant when compared to other Fire Emblem soundtracks. and it is, I guess, a little bit less dynamic than the Fire Emblem soundtracks that would come after this game. But either way, though, there's nothing much more to say. It's good, and it'll continue being good for a fair bit. But of course, in regards to the future of these games and that aspect, of course, as you well know, Shouzou Kaga does leave after this game, and notably, I guess, well, Shouzou Kaga, he said he wanted to continue on with a third Arcania game, and he probably would have wanted to come back to Jugdral or Valentia, maybe some of those places. He wanted to have a more iterative story for Fire Emblem, so to speak, but ultimately that didn't end up coming about, as of course there was a particular fallout with him and Nintendo and stuff, of course. But with Kaga, of course, being the creator of Fire Emblem and the lead, I guess, designer of the first 5 games, of course, there is a very pretty small subset of fans that are loyal to the first 5 Fire Emblem games in particular, as well as people that are just people who love the Jugdral games, who suck up all of the gastros out of genealogy and Thracia specifically. But either way, though, of course, yeah. And the final thing I wish to mention in regards to the Jugdral games is, well, I guess the Deadlords. They're interesting, I guess, maybe. They're introduced in Genealogy of the Holy War in the final chapter. They're sent out by Julius to help bolster Ishtar, I guess you can say. And, presumably from their name, they're dead. But, what type of dead? Well, I don't know, but they're presumably some type of undead ghost, something like that. But either way, though, notably, a couple of them do actually have holy blood, which is interesting, I guess. And they are obviously a fair bit stronger than the average soldier in the same class. But of course, moving on to Thracia 776, the Deadlords reappear in the final chapter of this game, and they help, I guess, protect Veld. But ultimately, of course, notably, the Deadlords, they can take on the form of some of Leaf's fallen allies. In particular, Avel, Galzus, Lifis, Dagdar, Sarah, and there's also Raedric. But if any of them die, of course, they can take on the form of their respective Deadlord. And I guess, interestingly, Leaf and his allies, none of them recognize these ghostly forms of their former allies. They all just kind of battle them without any issues there. So that's certainly interesting. But regardless of that little thing, of course, I guess the Deadlords, they don't have much relevancy. They don't pack much of a punch right now. But ultimately, the Deadlords represent, I guess, what the greater Fire Emblem story is set to be, all about. And yeah, it'll certainly get weird and interesting at the same time. Let's just say that. But on to FE6.